STOR1, the world is honestly a strange place. About 5 years ago, I did some work as a private investigator. And trust me, it's not nearly as exciting as people think. Most of it is just watching, taking notes, documenting things, sitting in a car for hours, basic surveillance. Movies and TV really oversell the job. I never saw anything life-changing while I was doing PI work, but there was one case that messed with me. Not because it was some huge conspiracy, because it showed me how disturbing certain people can be. To protect the woman's privacy, I'm going to call her Sue. About 6 months into doing freelance PI work, Sue reached out. She was young, confident, and ran her own business. Her company was already doing well and still growing. Honestly, I respected her a lot. She started with almost nothing and built something real. She'd gone out on her own, found investors, and managed to get the business off the ground. One of those investors was a friend of hers. I'll call him Steve. At first, she wouldn't even accept his money because they were friends. They'd gone on a few dates early on, but they both agreed they were better off as friends and nothing more. Sue had known Steve for years. They met back when she worked as a bartender, and he was a regular. She didn't know his exact age, but guessed he was around 10 years older than her. Everyone described him the same way. He carried himself like someone with serious money. He drove a Corvette, dressed like he was always headed to a business meeting, and he was always the guy flashing his wallet to buy drinks. While he was at the bar, Sue would talk about her goals, her dream business, what she wanted to build. Steve would offer to fund it constantly, almost daily, and Sue kept turning him down. He pushed hard. She refused, at least for a long time. Eventually, she hit a wall. The other investors weren't enough, and she ran out of money. She hated the idea of taking money from a friend, but Steve had basically become the last option if she wanted the business to survive. And that's when she learned the hard way why mixing money, friendship, and even a brief romantic history can be a disaster. Not long after Steve gave her the money, he changed. He became emotionally and mentally abusive. Sue kept the calls and texts and later showed them to me. This guy was relentless. He blew up her phone nonstop, day and night, literally 24/7. Sue didn't change her number and didn't want to get the law involved because she felt guilty. Like taking his money somehow made it her fault. And then it escalated. If Sue went out on a date, Steve would show up and cause problems. One night she was out drinking with a guy she'd been seeing. Steve followed them. The moment Steve saw the guy put his arm around Sue, Steve walked right up and punched him. Hard, knocking him out. I still don't know how Steve got away with that without charges. Sue thought it was his money and influence. I can't confirm that, but somehow nothing happened to him. According to Sue, this went on for months. She'd already spent most of his investment on the business. She was trapped, trying to keep her company alive while being suffocated by this guy. She told me it got so bad she was convinced he was watching her apartment at night. She'd wake up hearing what sounded like footsteps outside her bedroom, like someone pacing around outside her door. Whether it was real or paranoia, it destroyed her peace. She couldn't focus, couldn't date, couldn't live normally. That someone is always nearby feeling is crippling. Everywhere she went, she'd spot what she swore was his red pickup truck. And then, suddenly, no warning, Steve disappeared. No calls. No showing up. No noises outside her place. It was like someone flipped a switch and her life returned to normal. Sue hoped he'd finally moved on. Eventually, she started dating again, no interruptions. For a couple years, she kept expecting him to reappear. But as time passed, nothing. Her company finally took off, and she moved into a new house ready for a new chapter. That's when Steve started living in her head again. Not in a friendly way. She wanted to repay him, every dollar, just to remove the last thing he could ever hold over her. So she tried contacting him. Disconnected. Social media, nothing. No Facebook, no Instagram, no online presence at all. She even went back to the bar and asked if anyone had seen him. Nobody had in years. He had basically vanished. She was ready to let it go, until one night she heard a knock at her door. She looked through the window by the entryway and saw a tall person wearing a hood. She said she just knew it was Steve. No proof, just that gut feeling. The person knocked again. She stayed silent. According to Sue, the figure stood there for about 20 minutes, and then finally walked off. The next day she contacted me, and that's when I heard the whole story. She told me she was done living like this. She wanted me to find Steve so she could pay him back and finally move on. Once I started digging, I found something immediately unsettling. Steve wasn't even his real name, and I couldn't track where his money came from. Over time, I learned he'd done similar things in other towns too, using different names. Same pattern: flash money, get close to women, try to buy affection. But here's what made it even stranger. The last record of him anywhere lined up with the last time he contacted Sue, over 2 years earlier. Every alias went quiet. The rentals tied to him were empty. It was like he dropped off the map. Then, one night during my investigation, the hooded person came back to Sue's door again. She called me immediately. By the time I got there, he was gone. I checked around the neighborhood but stayed close. I didn't want to miss him if he returned. Sue was terrified he was coming back for her, and that it wouldn't stop. So for the next few nights, I staked out in front of her house. I told her if he showed up again, I'd catch him. And sure enough, around 2:00 a.m., there was another knock. I got out to approach him, but he spotted me instantly and took off into the dark. He was fast, and he headed straight into a heavily wooded area near Sue's property. I didn't chase blindly into the woods at night. I went back, checked on Sue, and told her to stay with family for safety. At sunrise, I went into the woods to track him. After walking for a bit, I found something that still makes my skin crawl. Hidden back there was a small shed, more like a crude shelter than a real building. I opened it slowly and got hit with a stench so bad it almost stopped me. Someone had clearly been living there and hadn't cleaned themselves in a long time. Nobody was inside at that moment. The floor was covered in trash, food wrappers, beer cans, soda cans. But the worst part wasn't the garbage or even the smell. Inside was a wheelchair, and sitting in it was a mannequin. The mannequin's head was damaged, smeared with makeup, and it had a blonde wig on. And sitting in its lap was a photo of Steve and Sue from back when she worked at the bar. It was arranged to look like Sue in the most twisted way possible. I called the police immediately, gave them the location, and explained everything. When the officers arrived, they quietly sat up and watched. Not long after that, the hooded figure returned to the shed and started talking to the mannequin. The police knocked, and the guy lost it instantly, exploded with rage. He tried to attack one of the officers, but he didn't get far. They arrested him. And yes, it really was Steve. Nobody could say how long he'd been living out there, hiding in the woods and watching Sue. It's sick to realize someone can go that far. If Sue hadn't contacted me, who knows how long it would have continued, or whether he would have eventually made it inside her home. It didn't look like he'd tried to break in yet, but whatever he wanted, it clearly wasn't going to be good. The frustrating part is we never got clean answers. We never learned where he'd gone or how he lost his money. The man they pulled out of those woods didn't even feel like the same person she'd described. He looked like a hollowed-out shell. I'm sure Sue is still recovering, and I don't know if you ever fully recover from something like that. It's a reminder that even someone you once considered a friend can turn out to be a monster. STORY 2, one of my biggest flaws is that I'm ridiculously easy to pressure into things. When I was younger, it got me into trouble constantly. I got expelled from my first high school because I tried to steal my principal's car, because someone dared me to do it. That kind of weakness didn't magically disappear when I became an adult. A few years back, I started getting this awful feeling that my fiancée was cheating on me. I told some friends, hoping they'd talk sense into me. Instead, they fed the paranoia, telling me if I felt it must be real. Those thoughts took over. I couldn't sleep. I stopped eating right. I couldn't even function without obsessing. Then one of my friends suggested something insane: hire a private investigator to follow her, rather than just having an adult conversation. At first, I thought it was a joke. I didn't even fully believe private investigators were a real thing outside of movies. And then I did the dumbest possible thing. I searched for a PI on Craigslist. I didn't know what was legal, and Craigslist felt like the only place where someone would do something shady like that. Even as I searched, I felt sick about it. Looking back, that anxiety was my instinct screaming at me. I found one person near me, someone named Shane. We messaged back and forth and agreed to meet at a park near my house. Driving there, I already felt disgusting about what I was doing. Still, that paranoia had a grip on me. At the park, I wandered around for a bit. I texted him a few times, no response. Then about 30 minutes later, he finally replied and told me exactly where to go. I walked to a big tree expecting someone polished, like a movie version of a PI. Instead, I saw this tall, slightly overweight guy in beat-up sweatpants. My first thought was, no chance that's him. Then he waved me over. He introduced himself as Shane, and then introduced his girlfriend, Gabby. He could tell I was uneasy. He told me not to worry about her, that she worked with him, so I could trust her. Gabby looked even less professional than Shane did, which didn't help at all. I know there's no official PI uniform, but this was not what I expected. Before I could say anything, Shane basically addressed it himself. He claimed dressing like that was part of blending in, looking normal so nobody notices you. At the time, it sounded logical enough, so I went with it. We sat at a picnic table and he started asking questions. My address, my job, basic details. Then the questions took a turn. They got weirdly personal, intimate, the kind of stuff that didn't feel connected to the job at all. I still answered because I assumed that's what you do when you hire someone like this. After a bit, we agreed on a price. I'd pay part now, and the rest when he delivered proof. He insisted it had to be cash, off the books. I remember handing him the money and feeling like I was getting played. He told me he'd be in touch. A week went by. Nothing. I tried reaching out, no response. I was pretty much convinced I'd been scammed. Then, at 1:16 a.m., I got a text from an unknown number. It was supposedly Shane. He said he had to switch phones, apologized for the silence, and told me he had vital information and I needed to meet him immediately. He said it couldn't wait. That already made no sense. My fiancée was sleeping right beside me. She'd also been home most of the day. I asked to meet in the morning. He insisted morning would be too late. My head wasn't operating logically. I was spiraling. He sent an address and told me to hurry and to bring the rest of the money. At the time, I was on call 24/7 for work, so leaving in the middle of the night wouldn't be totally suspicious. So I quietly got dressed and drove out. The address was about 10 minutes away. The whole drive I was sick to my stomach, imagining the worst possible evidence. I pulled up and the house looked dark, almost abandoned. I wasn't even sure I had the right place. I texted, I called, nothing. A few minutes later, I got a message, doors open. I asked if they could come outside because I didn't feel sure about the location. He responded, doors unlocked. Just come in. Every alarm in my body went off, but I still walked up to the door. Unlocked, just like he said. I stepped inside slowly. It was almost completely dark. I called out a couple times. No answer. I was about to leave when another text came in. I hear you upstairs. Forgot to tell you, we're in the basement. That's where our office is. Go to the door on the far left and come down. I moved toward the basement door, and it felt like my instincts were practically dragging me backward. I opened it. Stairs going down into nothing but darkness. No lights, no office, just an empty black pit. In that moment, it hit me how many red flags I'd ignored to even get that far. I didn't want to believe it was a setup, but it clearly was. Then another text. Are you coming down or are you going to stand there all night? That was it. I backed out quietly, slipped out of the house, got in my car and drove away. For a second, I questioned myself, wondered if I was overreacting. Then the last message came through. Good for you, buddy. Take care. The next day, the number didn't work anymore. The Craigslist post was gone. Shane and Gabby had taken my money and were obviously trying to lure me into that basement. For months after that, I was a mess. They had my home address. Everything. Every little noise made me think someone was at the door. Eventually, I confessed to my fiancée because she could see me unraveling. She was hurt that I suspected her, but she swore she wasn't cheating. We worked through my trust issues, and a few months later we moved. Once I had a new address, I finally felt like I could breathe. I should have reported them, but I didn't. I just swallowed the loss and moved on. It still makes me sick how close I probably came to something awful. I'm just grateful my instincts kicked in at the last second. STOY3, like everyone remembers, 2020 was a disaster. For me, it was even worse because in February I took a job 8 hours away from my hometown. I'd barely been in the new city a month before everything shut down. I was completely alone. After months of being stuck inside, I forced myself to try living again. Even with restrictions, I ended up on dating apps pretty quickly. I wasn't looking for some fairy tale relationship. I just wanted to meet people, feel normal, maybe connect casually. Over several months, I went on a handful of dates. The guys were fine, but they weren't right for me. A lot of them wanted something serious that I didn't have the energy to give. Then I met a guy I'll call Wade. He was attractive, smart, funny. On paper, perfect. But something felt off. Just his energy, his vibe didn't sit right with me. I'd forced relationships before, and I promised myself I wouldn't do that again. Still, I gave him a fair chance. We went out a few more times. I tried to let the spark develop, but it never did. I assumed he felt the same. Eventually, we talked less, then it just fizzled out completely. No big ending, no drama, just silence. I moved on and figured he did too. After Wade, I took a break from dating for a few weeks. My mood improved. I also finally started making friends locally. Then I noticed something. A gray SUV with dark, tinted windows began showing up outside my house at night. On its own, that doesn't sound crazy. But it hadn't been there before. And then suddenly it was there constantly, every night. After about a week, I started paying attention to neighbors' cars. Nobody on my street seemed to have a new SUV. That weekend I went grocery shopping. While I was inside, I got that awful feeling that someone was tracking me. The store was crowded, so I couldn't tell. But when I walked to my car, a gray SUV with tinted windows was parked right next to me. Maybe coincidence. But it rattled me. I loaded my car quickly and left. As I drove past the front of the store, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A tall man with slicked back hair and sunglasses staring $8 at my car. At least it looked like he was staring directly at me. I didn't wait to see if he got into that SUV. I just left. I tried to shake it off because I had a coffee date that day with someone named Paul. My first date since Wade. The date was actually going great. Paul was charming, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was clicking with someone. Then I glanced out the window, and I saw the gray SUV again. My mood changed instantly, and Paul noticed right away. I started scanning the coffee shop, trying to see if the slick-haired guy was inside. Near the door at a corner table, there he was, looking at his phone. At that point, it wasn't coincidence. Someone was following me. I didn't want to scare Paul off because I genuinely liked him and didn't want to sound insane. So I lied and said I had something work-related I had to handle. He understood. I left fast, took a different route home. Didn't matter. A few minutes into my drive, the SUV was in my rearview mirror. I drove around until I didn't see it anymore, then headed home. That night I texted Paul and told him the truth about why I acted weird. While I was texting him, I looked out my window, and the gray SUV was sitting outside my house again. Paul convinced me to call the police. Officers arrived and approached the SUV while I watched from my living room window. The man got out and spoke to them calmly. No aggression, no panic. At one point, he pulled something from inside his coat and showed the officer. After a few minutes, the police came to my door. What they told me honestly made my blood run cold. The man was a licensed private investigator. He really had been following me. I pressed them for details. Who hired him? Why? What was going on? And they said they didn't have anything else to give me. It felt like a total violation. When the police left, I went outside to confront him. But the SUV was already gone. It didn't come back after that, but the feeling of being watched didn't disappear. And the lack of closure about who hired a PI on me ate at me. A few weeks later, Paul and I went hiking at a state park nearby. Halfway through the hike, I got that same "someone's behind us" feeling. Paul kept turning around too, scanning the woods. I even joked maybe it was another investigator trying to finish the job. We laughed, but it didn't feel funny. When we got back to the parking lot, Paul said he had to use the bathroom. I waited outside, scrolling on my phone. Then I heard running. I turned, and sprinting out of the woods was Wade. He grabbed my arm and screamed that we were leaving right now. I started yelling. Wade kept accusing me of being unfaithful, saying I'd betrayed him, but that he'd forgive me. I just had to go with him. Paul heard me and ran out, tackled Wade to the ground. Wade got up and started threatening both of us. Paul didn't back down. Wade hesitated, then slowly retreated. We ran to Paul's car. The second I got in, I called the police. At first, nothing happened because it was he said, she said, and there wasn't a clear crime caught on camera. And believe it or not, the private investigator Wade hired ended up helping me. While investigating me, the PI realized I was not actually in a relationship with Wade like Wade had claimed. The investigator apparently started sensing Wade was unstable, and even warned him to stay away from me. Obviously, Wade ignored that. When the police contacted the investigator, he told them Wade might be a real threat. That statement helped me get a restraining order. That was basically the limit of what I could do legally. After that, Wade disappeared. No messages, no sightings, deleted his social media. Gone. Even now, I'm still scared he'll show up one day. What terrifies me is how little I even knew him, and how far he went anyway. If Paul hadn't been there at that park, I honestly don't know what Wade would have done. It sounds dramatic, but I genuinely believe Paul saved my life. It's been years. I haven't seen Wade since, and I hope I never do.